But tonight we want to look at Nahum, and it's appropriate for us to follow on the footsteps of Jonah. And let's begin with prayer. Father in heaven, tonight we're thankful that we can look at the book of Nahum, and we just pray that as we do tonight, your Spirit will guide us in Jesus' name. Amen. Now we realize it's also a short book. It is one of the minor prophets, and it is written a little bit later than Jonah, about 150 years later. And they kind of date it by the information that we have in there, because there's some interesting information that he brings in here that lets us know when he wrote. You notice he talks here about the destruction of Thebes, in Egypt. Well, we pretty much have a date for that, so we can tell when he wrote, and they kind of feel he wrote about 150 years after Jonah, or somewhere around the mid-600 BC, somewhere about 640. Some say he wrote afterwards, because Nahum, if we could read in Hebrew, we would find that Nahum is actually a very poetical book. It's written almost what we would call as rhyme, but we use rhyme, but they're poetry. It's written that way, and you can really see it if you read closely in those first 8 verses. He really shows you what Hebrew poetry is like. Let's deal with some of the background of Nahum. Nahum, did anyone find out what his name means? We love his name. Yeah, a comforter. It's exactly what his name means. Jonah was the preacher that prophesied and pretty much said what? God's going to destroy this place, and they repented. Jonah was sad, but Nahum now is the comforter. Who's he a comforter for? Not Nineveh. Who's he a comforter for? God's people, because Nineveh again started persecuting God's people, sending them far away, distribute them throughout the nations. And did you find out what city he grew up in? It's amazing as I looked at this. It says here in the first verse, it says, an oracle concerning Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum, the El-Koshite. The interesting thing that we find about this is it's an obscure word, but we find that history, or at least tradition, says that he actually grew up in the city of Capernaum, because it's made up of 2 words, Caper and Nahum, Capernaum, and it means the village of Nahum. So he would also be from Galilee like Jonah, and he would be a prophet from Israel, all right? And so from what I can find out, a lot of people have written things about the El-Koshites. The El-Koshites tend to be a very nationalistic group, a very rigid group. We might call them today modern Zionists. You have an idea here? At the time of Jesus, they would have been the Pharisees. They were defenders of the faith. And so it lets you know that he's very nationalistic. Here as he writes this, he's almost like Jonah, who said what? I'm not going to preach there. Why would I preach? But Nahum is pronouncing a message to them. So we don't have any record that Nahum actually went to Nineveh. So it was written down either as a reminder to the nations or as a letter that was sent there written in verse. And it says here, as we look at it, it can be well divided. I didn't know how much we wanted to go into the divisions of here, but really each chapter is pretty much a verse division. And it says here in verse 2, the Lord is jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is filled with wrath. The Lord takes vengeance on his foes and maintains his wrath against his enemies. He is slow to anger and great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. His way is the whirlwind and the storm, and clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and dries it up. He makes all the rivers run dry. Bashan and Carmel wither, and the blossoms of Lebanon fade. The mountains quake before him, and the hills melt away. The earth trembles at his presence, the world and all who live in it. Who can withstand his indignation? Who can endure his fierce anger? His wrath is poured out like fire. The rocks are shattered before him. So what do you think of that? If you notice, you could actually sum up those first 6 verses in one line, because this is poetry. I hope you heard it. He keeps saying the same thing over and over again, but different imagery. So you get the idea here that God does what? You could sum it up by saying what?
He takes vengeance.
He does. There comes a time. Wait a minute. Do you think of that New Testament verse? Vengeance is mine. What? Yeah. Now, you got to realize many who have studied this, now for me, I can almost see it, but not fully. Most see this as a parallel to when Moses came down out of the mountain and he broke the 10 Commandments. And you remember what Moses said to God? God, blot my name out and save these people. But what did God say? I'm not going to do that. These people have sinned, and what? I'm going to take care of them. And that's what God says. That was God speaking to let Moses know and everyone else, God does demand responsibility for our actions. Isn't that what he's saying? That's what he's saying here. He says what? God is jealous for his people. And usually you think of jealousy in regards to what? God has said this before, hasn't he? I'm jealous for my people. Why? He's jealous, isn't he? He's a jealous God, exactly. There it is, right? In regards to what? Idol worship, right? Second commandment says what? I'm a jealous God. Because why? Why is God jealous?
He loves us.
He loves us, and he says what? You can't do what? Serve two masters. Isn't God telling us the truth? Okay, remember, it was never his intention for men to have more than one wife. Isn't that true? Okay, because he knew what? They would be divided, wouldn't they? Okay, and so even with God, he says what? I've chose you, you know? And God is jealous for his people, and it says what? He will take vengeance. And he will do what? You got to love verse 3 because it does sound like Exodus chapter 34. The Lord is slow to anger. Is he? Yeah, we know he is, isn't he? But he will not leave the unguilty punished. It does sound like the 10 Commandments, doesn't it? Verse 4. Notice, you got to think of Job too. He is in the whirlwind and the storm. What about Elijah? Elijah saw the whirlwind and God was not in the whirlwind. There was an earthquake, he was not in the earthquake. He saw the fire, God was not in the fire. Where was God? Still small voice. He rebukes the sea. It's interesting, the thing here, it lets you know, Nahum was familiar with Bashan and Carmel. Does anyone have any concepts of where Bashan and Carmel is? Mount Carmel was where Elijah went, and what did he do? He slew the 450 prophets. God answered by fire, right? And that's where he saw the little cloud the size of a man's hand coming, and rain was coming, and he ran down to meet. Okay? We're trying to give you a concept here from Mount Carmel. You could look over and see what? Mediterranean Sea. Okay? Where's Bashan? If you remember, in Bashan was one of the what? Cities of refuge, right? It's East Jordan. Okay? What was Bashan famous for? Rich fields. In fact, a Bashan cow was considered prime cow. They were the fat cows, okay? How do we know? Read about it in Amos. He says the women in Israel have become like Bashan cows. That's Amos, okay? But here we're trying to paint it because right at the foot of Mount Carmel is what? Sharon. Most people call it Sharon, like the Rose of Sharon, but it's actually pronounced Sharon. And what does it mean? The plain. It was filled with flowers and beauty and rich. And what does it say here? He makes all the rivers run dry. Bashan and Carmel wither. And the blossoms, that's why he's saying this, because those are the lush areas that depend on the water. And what happens? Yes, okay. And it's interesting that he uses this here because as we look at the judgment on Nineveh, we find that he uses the same imagery of water. And so, what else? Who can endure his fierce anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are even shattered before him. Usually people look at rocks as being indestructible, but here it says what happens. The wrath of God does what? How does Peter describe the wrath of God when it comes? It says what? Melt. Thank you. Do you know? How much heat does it take, Rudy, to melt a rock? Yeah. So God's wrath melts rocks. Okay. Pretty hot. It's letting you know here again, God's in charge of the fire. Remember, he'll destroy the earth not with water, but he will use water. And it says here, how do you like verse 7? Now the contrast. The Lord is good. Wait a minute. He just got through saying what? You can't stand in God's presence, right? And then what does he say? A refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. Is that true? Come on, you all got to be thinking of Psalm 91. What does it say? A 1,000 will fall at your right side, 10,000 at your left. The plague will not come nigh thee. But with an overflowing flood, there it is again, he will make an end to Nineveh. He will pursue his foes into darkness. That pretty much is the pronouncement of God's judgment on Nineveh. Now, the amazing thing is we didn't know much about Nineveh. And remember I told you that they found the clay tablets. Remember, Ashurbanipal did what? He collected all these tablets and everything, every place he conquered. Not only did they take the gold and the silver and the bronze and everything, but he took whatever scrolls he could find. And they found that, and actually we do have a record. We find out how they were destroyed in 612 BC. Does anyone know? It's amazing. And it was 3 armies that fought together. Do you remember who they were? Babylon. Who else? The Medes. Yeah. Medes and Persians were all the same. Well, they weren't combined then because Cyrus and so forth. And who was the other one? The Scythians. Okay? Those 3, guess how they defeated Nineveh? A river went through Nineveh. And the river, they flooded the river. They didn't dry up the river. They flooded the river. And when the river was flooded, guess what happened? All the flood barriers were broken, and it allowed them to come into the city and destroy the city. God says here, but with an overwhelming flood, he will make an end of Nineveh. And that's exactly what they use, just like when the Babylonians were defeated by the Medes and Persians. Instead of flooding Babylon, what did they do? They diverted the river Euphrates and walked through waist-deep water and went through, and they found that the city was not guarded because everyone was celebrating and everyone was worried about the three words that were written on the wall that said what? Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, which means what? You balance and found wanting, and what? Your kingdom is divided, and it will not stand. Okay? And so here it's almost the same for Nineveh as it was for Babylon. Here God says he's sending a flood, and remember, on the minor prophet Habakkuk, we actually have the destruction mentioned of Babylon, along with Jeremiah and Isaiah. So it's something that was common here. But here Nineveh is mentioned. Let's go on. You still with me in verse 9? Whenever they plot against the Lord, he will bring to an end. Trouble will not come a second time. What do you think that means? Trouble will not come a second time. Okay, so you see this as that verse that we always use for, this verse is always used for what? In parallel with what? Ezekiel 28, when God says what? To the imagery there of the king of Tyre, and it's reference to Lucifer. He says what? You will be what? No more. Okay? Here it says what? Trouble will not come up a second time. And really, although we use this to say that when God puts an end, it does not come, and that's how we're using it when we use that verse. But in the context, he's saying what? Nineveh will come to an end and be no more. Can I tell you something? In the year 331, at the Battle of Arbela, between the Persian forces and Alexander the Great, Arbela is right near Nineveh, and Alexander did not even know there was a city there. Because Nineveh was discovered, who remembers the date that Nineveh was discovered? 1842. Not until 1842 did they realize that there was a city of Nineveh there. It was covered. It was completely destroyed. God says they will not rise again. Nineveh as a nation did not rise again. Okay? And that's what he says here. It's not going to happen a second time. Why? Why is God saying this to Nineveh? What happened? 150 years early, God pronounced the judgment on them. What did they do? They repented, and then what happened?
Sinned again.
Yep. They went back and did the very, very same things. And so God did what? He destroyed them and said no more. All right? Even you can look at it at Babylon, when God put Nebuchadnezzar in the field for 7 years. And what happened? He repented, gave his heart to God. But remember the first statement in chapter 5 of Daniel that Daniel makes to Belshazzar. What does he say? You remember how God was merciful to your grandpa. And yet you still took those vessels and worshiped the gods of gold and silver and stone. Yeah. He knew. That's what, Daniel had been in there the whole time. And he said, you knew, and yet you disregarded. And it's the same thing here. Remember, I don't believe Nineveh forgot Jonah, even 150 years later. There's some things that we don't forget. Let's see, 150 years ago would put us where? Do you remember some things back there from 1850? 1860? Somebody must remember something in 1863.
That's when the church was born.
Exactly, Rudy. People remember things. We were talking about that earlier, before you came in. Before we put the camera on, we were talking about that. Yeah, what is it? I don't believe the people forgot about Jonah. And yet it says here, because God kept track. And it says here, they will be entangled among the thorns and drunk from their wine. They will be consumed like dry stubble. And you can almost get the imagery here if you pour alcohol on dried grain and then you torch a match to it, what's going to happen to it? Even more so, okay? And from you, O Nineveh, has come forth from you, O Nineveh, has one come forth who plots evil against the Lord and counsels wickedness. This is what the Lord says, verse 12. And remember, this is the sin of Nineveh. Although they have allies and are numerous, they will be cut off and pass away. If you ever want to do an interesting study, Psalm 37 uses this word cut off over and over again. It says the righteous will flourish, but the wicked will be cut off. They'll be like stubble and used no more. And you might want to read the whole psalm because over and over again it uses this word cut off, okay, as a reference to gone, okay, no more. And it says here, although I have afflicted you, O Judah, I will afflict you no more, okay. You got to think that every time you hear that, what chapter, what book do you think of? Hosea. And it says, now I will break the yoke from your neck and tear your shackles away. The Lord has given a command concerning Nineveh. You will have no descendants to bear your name. I will destroy the carved images and cast idols that are in the temple of your gods. I will prepare your grave, for you are vile. Look, there on the mountains, the feet of one who brings good news, who proclaims peace. Celebrate your festivals, O Judah, and fulfill your vows. No more will the wicked invade you. They will be completely destroyed. Come on, you got to know where that verse is found. Okay, very good. Isaiah 40, which we know is one of the great chapters in Isaiah that says what? What cantata? I don't know if that's a fair word. The Messiah was written on the basis of Isaiah 40. None else. Okay? But you're also thinking what? New Testament. Blessed are the feet of those who preach good news. Where's that found? Romans where? Romans 10. Okay? Whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. This is God's message. He says what is going to happen to Nineveh, because why? It really goes the same message that Jesus gave when he was here. What? How we treat each other determines destiny, doesn't it? And they will be completely destroyed. No more wicked will invade you. Is that true? Is that a conditional statement of God? Is there such a thing as conditional statements? Is that a conditional statement? Because can't the same thing happen to Judah that happened to Nineveh? Or is God a respecter of persons? How many chances was Judah given until they finally went to captivity? And even then, Jesus, when he preached and he died and he rose again and ascended to heaven, what happened? They were given how many more years? 36 more years, almost 40. Right? Actually, no, they were given more than that, weren't they? They were almost given exactly 40, weren't they? From 31 till 70, isn't that almost 40? A generation? And then it was destroyed in 70 AD. Okay, so hopefully you looked here at chapter 1. It mentioned God's wrath, God's power, God's goodness. And also it mentioned what? Nineveh's sin. God identifies the sin, and then he does what? He destroyed it. He kind of mentions here a little bit, as we've looked at, it's the first will be last will be first. Nineveh wanted to be first, but they ended up being last. All right, chapter 2. Remember? The first one was God is the judge. Chapter 1 was about God, wasn't it? All about God. Why he's bringing judgment? He's the one who brings judgment, and he's the one who forgives. He's also a God of goodness. The second one is, let's find out what happens. An attacker advances against you, O Nineveh. Guard the fortresses, watch the road, brace yourselves, marshal your strength. The Lord will restore the splendor of Jacob like the splendor of Israel, though destroyers have laid them waste and have ruined their vines. So notice what God says here. Just like with Israel, God will once again have mercy on them. The shields of his soldiers are red. The warriors are clad in scarlet. The metal on the chariots flashes on the day they are made ready. The spears of pine are brandished. What do you think of this? Many see this as imagery of the shields being turned to blood. So much bloodshed. The chariots storm through the streets, rushing back and forth through the squares. They look like flaming torches. They dart about like lightning. He summons his picked troops, yet they stumble on their way. They dash to the city wall. The protected shield is put in its place. The river gates are thrown open. The palaces collapse. It is decreed that the city be exiled and carried away. Its slaves' girls mourn like doves and beat upon their breasts. Nineveh is like a pool, and its water is draining away. Stop, stop, they cry, but no one turns back. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold. The supply is endless, the wealth from all its treasures. She is pillaged, plundered, stripped. Hearts melt, knees give way, bodies tremble. Every face grows pale. I have to say it sounds like Nahum was there. What is he describing? What does it look like? It's an amazing thing that I found that a historian wrote that there was so much treasure in Nineveh that when the Ninevites fled, the armies did not pursue them. Instead, they grabbed as much spoil as they could. And it says there, the gold, the silver, everything that they had. Bodies tremble, every face grows pale. Now tell me, when you read this, you've got to think about Revelation, with the destruction of the beast, the destruction of God's people. Even as we've talked about Babylon, the Babylonians grew pale. If you've ever been in a war situation, you might know this. I can only tell you, my mom was in England during the bombing of World War II, and she said She'd never want to experience anything like that again. She said hearing the bombs, you could hear them whistle, explode, and, you know, no lights, ration food. They had the ration cards and everything. And so we don't know unless this happened to us. But I think some of us here, or if not all of us, have the imagery of 9/11. I mean, how many times do they show it? And you could see the people running with all the debris falling down and everything, the look on people's face. It was devastating. Yes? Very good. Very good. Very good. Yeah, Revelation 6. Yeah. Revelation 6, they call for the mountains and the rocks to fall on them and hide them from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Yeah, here it is. But notice, yeah, they're just fleeing. No one's chasing them because they want the spoil. So it shows you that even though God is using these three nations of Babylon and the Medes as well as the Scythians, even though he's using all three of them, he's letting them keep what they get. And but he's letting you know how devastating it is for the people. They were all there. I guess I can use this word. They were all smug behind the wall, thinking that it was impregnable. And they put their trust in their city and their walls and in their government rather than repenting as they did before. And it says here, where now is the lion's den? This is interesting because there, as they unearthed Nineveh, they found a frieze of Ashurbanipal. And he's there on a chariot, and I think if you look this up, you can see it online. He's actually there on a chariot killing a lion with a knife. And for them, they considered that to be the highest honor that they could offer to their gods, would be a lion. And they considered the lion to be something that represented them. And if you notice the imagery here through 11 through 13, God's actually saying, you think that your lion's den, that you're the lion's den. That's what they called themselves. They were the lion's den or the lair. And it says here, where now is your lion's den? The place where they fed their young, where the lion and the lioness went and the cubs with nothing to fear. The lion killed enough for the cubs and strangled the prey for its mate, filling his lair with the kill and his dens with the prey. And of course, he's using it here to represent Nineveh. Nineveh went out, destroyed all the nations, and brought back the spoils for them. And you kind of get an idea here that the common people relished it. I think most of us remember the story of Sisera. You guys remember the story of Sisera, the general, on his iron chariots, and he fought against Barak and died. Why am I drawing a blank on her name? The prophetess. Deborah, thank you so much. And who was it who killed him? Jael. Yeah, and you remember the last thing there in the next chapter, Deborah writes a sonnet. And in there she says, his mother's sitting at home, wondering, is he bringing her some nice garments? Is he bringing her more servants? What's he doing? Why is he taking so long? And that's the way it is here. The people, how do we say it? they wanted their generals to go out. They wanted their leaders to go out and destroy all these nations so they could have the spoil. Uh-oh. Does that sound close to home? We remember when colonization, and you know the U.S. is still accused of colonization. Colonization, you remember what that was? See how much land and country you can get? Because what? You get all the spoils, remember? It was all about spices, wasn't it? That's what they said.
Sun never sets on the brink.
That's right. There you know what I'm talking about. Okay? It was all about spices. And then the spices became what? Oh, yeah. You didn't hear that, did you? I didn't think you heard that, did you? Okay. And it says here, I'm trying to paint the picture so you can understand that God was fair in bringing judgment because the people didn't condemn their leaders for what they did. Instead, they said, come on, bring us more. You got it? The people here are who? The lioness and the cubs waiting for their leaders to come back and bring the spoil. You got it? So it lets you know that the people were a part of it. I'm against you, declares the Almighty, verse 13. I will burn up your chariots in smoke, and the sword will devour your young lions, and I will leave you no prey on the earth. The voices of your messengers will no longer be heard. It's pretty much what God says, okay? And again, the parallels between here and Revelation are very, very clear. But again, if you look at the other prophets, meaning both Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah, the major prophets, you'll find the parallels that may not be in reference to Nineveh, but definitely when God pronounces the judgment on Babylon, and also upon Egypt and Edom. We already read about Obadiah and what he said about Edom. These are the same words that God uses. He brings the same judgment. It's no different. And when the judgment comes on people at the end of the world, it will be for the same reason. Because there was no compassion for other people. There was nothing that remained in their heart that even resembled God. They were there saying, yes, conquer more because we want more. Okay? And it's, as short as shows you, they're almost like the grave, remember? Solomon said there's one thing that can't be satisfied. What is it? The grave. Because the grave says what? I can fit more people. Isn't it? Can it? How many people can the grave fit? It never says I'm full, does it? The grave? Woe to the city, and now we're looking at chapter 3. Hopefully you got it. God describes the judgment that's going to come, and the judgment is on Nineveh is going to come how? Through a flood. And also what's it going to do? The city will have no defense. What else? The city will be plundered, and what happens? Even all the people in the lair, which is considered the city, will be what? Destroyed. No more messengers. Now, chapter 3. If there's such a thing, you could call chapter 3, I don't know if you like this word or not, justification for God's actions. Okay? Remember chapter 1 was God is the judge. Chapter 2 is God describes his judgment. And chapter 3 is now what? Justification. Okay. It says, woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. So what's he saying first? Yep. Their character was pretty much set. How much compassion did they have? None. Lies? God doesn't like lies. In fact, what did Jesus say about the devil? He's the father of lies and what? How much truth is in him? So how much can you trust that he says? Okay. The crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses, and jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords, and glittering spears, many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over the corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a harlot alluring the mistress of sorceries who enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. So what's God saying here? I think I've pretty much said it. What was Nineveh's goal and purpose? Conquer and take all the valuable. All right? At least Babylon did what? A little bit less. What did they do? They took captives and used them in their service. What did Nineveh do? Destroyed. Or they moved them on. Okay? Verse 5, I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. What's God really saying here? He's exposing them. That's all he's saying. I'm exposing you. I will pelt you with filth. I will treat you with contempt. I will make you a spectacle. All who see you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is in ruins. Who will mourn for her? Where can I find anyone to comfort you? So what is he saying here? What's God's justification for bringing destruction on Nineveh? They had reached a place as a nation where they were no good. About like Sodom and Gomorrah? About like the antediluvian world? Are you better than Thebes, situated on the Niles with water around her? That's how we kind of date this because of Thebes. And we know when Thebes was wiped out, and in the mid 600s. And it says here, the river was her defense, the waters her wall. Cush and Egypt were her boundless strength. Put and Libya were among her allies. Yet she was taken captive and went into exile. Her infants were dashed to pieces at the head of every street. Lots were cast for her nobles, and all her great men were put in chains. You too will become drunk. You will go into hiding and seek refuge from the enemies. That's what God says here. Even Jesus says, the world will become drunk. Wait a minute. Is anyone thinking Revelation 17? She has caused all the nations to drink of the cup. The harlot sitting on the beast. And all the nations have become drunk. Very similar language. Means they become like her. Verse 12. All your fortresses are like fig trees with their first ripe fruit. When they are shaken, the figs fall into the mouth of the eater. Remember, John even says when the stars fall from heaven, it's like unripe figs. But these are ripe figs. They drop right in your mouth. Look at your troops. They are all like women. Oops. Should we skip this verse, ladies? Because you know really what they're saying here, right? What is he trying to say here? If all the troops are like women, what are they saying? Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much. See, did you notice a woman said that? Okay, see, the men aren't thinking that. Okay, but thank you very much. Okay. The gates of your land are wide open to your enemies. Fire has consumed their bars. So notice again, he's describing the destruction that will come through the water. Draw water for the siege, strengthen your defenses, work the clay, tread the mortar, repair the brickwork. There the fire will devour you, the sword will cut you down, and like grasshoppers consume you. Multiply like grasshoppers, multiply like locusts. Excuse me. You have increased the number of your merchants till they are more than the stars of the sky, but like locusts they will strip the land and fly away. Again, you're still thinking Revelation 18. You should be. Your guards are like locusts, your officials like swarms of locusts that settle in the walls on a cold day. But when the sun appears, they fly away and no one's there. What does he say? Even their great warriors, what? Will be gone. O king of Assyria, your shepherds slumber. Your nobles lie down to rest. Your people are scattered on the mountains with no one to gather them. Nothing can heal your wound. Your injury is fatal. Everyone who hears the news about you, clap his hands at your fall. For who has not felt your endless cruelty? What does God say? Kind of ends there with an interesting thought. God is saying what? When I get rid of you, the whole world is going to be a happier place. That's what he says. He says, I'm doing this, why? Because the whole world will be glad to see you gone. Can you imagine saying that? Remember, God is giving justification for why he destroyed Nineveh. Because they had reached the place where they were, can I say this? Will you let me use this word? No earthly good. They were like Sodom and Gomorrah. They had reached the place where if they were taken off the planet, it would be no different place. No great loss. Yeah, Henry.
You mentioned Assyria and Nineveh. Are they one and the same?
Yeah.
They're just two different names for the same?
Nineveh is a city. The Assyrians are the people. Got it?
Oh, I
Yeah.
thought it was reversed.
Yeah. It would be like saying Washington, D.C., and then at the end saying Americans. Got it? Okay. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah, that's what it is. The Assyrian people were, Nineveh was their capital. Okay. So yeah, what do you think? Is God justified in destroying Nineveh?
Yes.
He is. You can almost see some parallels here, again, with applying it to Satan, Lucifer, the devil, the same thing. God reached the place where he said, right? You can't be here in heaven anymore. And he's going to reach the place where he says you can't be in the universe anymore, right? Is that kind of the place that God's looking for the earth to reach? Jesus says, what's going to happen? When he comes, number one, will he find faith on the earth? And he says, the love of many will what? Wax cold. If something's wax cold, what does that mean? Can't melt it anymore, huh? All right? Isn't it the same? Isn't Jesus saying that's when we know the coming will be? Is it close? Are we?
Past due.
It's past due. Okay? I think maybe we don't know that we think it's bad, but maybe it's got to reach that place because the Ninevites had no compassion for anybody. Nobody. Women, children. Is our world getting to that place? Is it already there? We can look at other countries. We can look at radical groups, and we can actually think, man, they have little compassion for people. How about in our country? Is there still compassion for people?
Yes.
Still a little bit or a lot? We're still a giver nation, aren't we? Even though they say for that giving there has to be something in return, right? Okay. What do you think? Was God justified? Because that's what chapter 3 is about. Was God justified in making that decision to destroy them? And you see, that's the very thing. And you know, this is the argument that some people have about Seventh-day Adventists, which I believe it's there. I believe when you look at Revelation 20, it says, they reign with Christ 1,000 years, and they look at the books. Was God justified in not saving those people that you think should be there? I believe that is a time for that. I don't know, that's me. Maybe I've been a Seventh-day Adventist too long, Rudy. Maybe. What do you think? No. Okay, but that's what I read in Revelation 20, okay? I mean, and you know, somebody told me the other day, Pastor, you never mentioned the verse in 2 Corinthians. I said, I usually never think of that verse in 2 Corinthians when Paul says, you'll be judging angels. You know the verse I'm talking about. Okay. I said, I never even think of it in that context, you know. But, you know, think about it. You know, God's saying he's defending himself here. Is God justifiable in taking the life of people? Because remember, God's whole plan for all of us is to what? To be saved, but also to do what? To be like him to other people. And when we reach the place where we're hoarding, we're only worried about ourselves and thinking only about ourselves, guess what? We're no longer like God, are we? Okay? Jesus never worried about a single meal, did he? Did he? Even after going 40 days and 40 nights, did he ever say, am I going to eat again? Did he? Go ahead, Yvonne. It's called Majul, right? How do we pronounce it? Mojul. Am I close on that? Mojul, I think. Yeah. He says he was the result of Jonah's preaching. Which is true. But I think the whole thing is that God is saying they would never be another nation again, and really they're not, are they? Even Babylon, remember, he says just the owls and the jackals are going to be there. So what do you guys think about Nineveh?
Pastor, if these stories are prophecies, then that means that the end time, what happened to...
They're types.
So this
They're
is
types.
going to happen in our time?
Yeah, they're types of what the destruction. Again, that key word that you brought up, the key verse, it will not rise a second time. This is it. God is letting us know that yes, cities, nations were destroyed, even the world was destroyed. It's going to happen again. And remember, Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, as it was in the days of Lot, but he also says, as it was in the days of Jonah. So Jesus saw Nineveh's destruction as a type, and we can hear in there that the very things that are written here are applied to who? To the beast and all who worship the beast, because now you become a part of their nation. And remember, the beast is only concerned about who? Right? They want everyone to worship the beast, see? It's all about self. And really, that's why Nineveh was destroyed. They repented. And even remember Daniel's statement in chapter 4 of Daniel that he made to Nebuchadnezzar. What did he say? Who knows, Nebuchadnezzar? Start to do good. Maybe God will turn this off. Turn this away from you. But guess what? Nineveh did not change, because a year later he's walking in his palace and he says what? Is not this great Babylon that I, and then he heard the voice that said, now your kingdom is taken. So he had a year extra after the dream. So God is God of mercy. And somebody recently talked about 13 trips around the city of Jericho as an opportunity for people to be saved. So I'm just saying that, God is always a God of mercy. And there's times that he does extend things, and we realize for Nineveh, it was 150 years that he extended. And even the building of the ark, that's the thing that always gets me. It didn't take him that long to build the ark. But why so many years? Because we know it was from Noah's 500th year to his 600th year. It didn't take him 100 years to build the boat. But it was there for what purpose? Sometimes we think it was just to save the animals. God wanted to save the people. And, people should have been building their own boats at that time, and they would have been saved. Do you realize that? If they would have said, let's build our own boat, they would have been inspired to do it. But nobody did anything because they doubted his message. And I think that's the way we're going to get in our world today, is God's extending it for people. I don't know, that's what I see because of, what's that verse? And I should have used that verse on Sabbath because it's such a great verse. What? God is not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. Go ahead. 2 Peter 3:10. You guys knew that. 3:9. But even Lamech. Yeah. Lamech was only 777.
Yeah. But I wonder how many people actually did turn and accept God but didn't live to be on the boat.
Those guys. Lamech, Methuselah. And we can't answer that. We understand there is sort of a teaching that goes around to answer that question, but not much in the Bible about that other than adding up the years and finding out that they died the year of the flood, whether the day before or whatever, but they died the year of the flood. So we don't have an answer, but that's really the message that I hear of Nahum, is that God does reach a place, and we found that when we looked at Obadiah. God does reach a place where he says, that's it. You guys, I'll use the word again, you're no earthly good. And remember, if you're not good on the earth, you understand? The earth accepts anybody. But if you're not good on the earth, then there's only one place for you. Where? Below the earth. That's right, the grave. Okay, you guys remembered that. Okay. And the rich young ruler said what? I ain't giving up everything. And because Jesus said everything for the rich young ruler, right? Didn't he? But what did he say? What did he say to the short guy? Zacchaeus. He didn't say anything. Did he say give up? Did he say give to the poor? Give to everyone you cheated? Did he?
Half of my goods I give to
Yeah, but Jesus didn't tell him to give up anything. He said, today salvation's come to your house. See? See the difference? He didn't say.